On May 3, 2007, a 3-year-old girl disappeared from a holiday apartment in Portugal. Her name was Madeleine McCann. She had been left asleep with her siblings while her parents dined nearby. When her mother returned, the bedroom window was open and Madeleine was gone. There were no signs of forced entry, no clear noise, no confirmed witness inside the room. Within hours, the case spread beyond the resort and into international headlines. Search teams, police, and media all moved in, but the timeline already had gaps. Every version of events depended on minutes that no one could fully verify. What started as a missing child case became one of the most complex investigations in modern history. In Praia de la Luz, Portugal, the McCann family was staying in a ground-floor holiday apartment known as 5A. Madeleine McCann, age 3, was sleeping inside with her twin siblings. Her parents had gone to a nearby restaurant within walking distance of the apartment. They returned periodically to check on the children throughout the evening. The routine depended on timing that was never precisely recorded. At around 10 p.m., her mother entered the apartment for another check. The bedroom door was open wider than expected. The window was also open, with the shutter raised. Madeleine was no longer in her bed. Her siblings remained asleep, undisturbed in their cribs. There were no immediate signs of forced entry. From that moment, the investigation began with a timeline no one could fully confirm. The initial search began inside the resort, focusing on nearby apartments, pathways, and open areas around apartment 5A. Resort staff, guests, and police moved quickly, but the early hours were unstructured and lacked coordination. Attention turned to who had access to the apartment during the evening and whether anyone had been seen nearby. Witness accounts began to emerge, but many of them conflicted on timing, direction, and descriptions. One reported sighting described a man carrying a child away from the area around the time Madeleine disappeared. The timeline depended heavily on routine checks made by the parents and their friends at the restaurant. However, the exact sequence of those checks could not be fully verified or reconstructed with certainty. Some gaps suggested that more time may have passed before the disappearance was discovered. From the beginning, the investigation was shaped by uncertainty in minutes that could not be accounted for. As statements were compared, inconsistencies began to appear in the timing of movements between the restaurant and the apartment. Some checks described by the group overlapped, while others left longer gaps than initially believed. Attention focused on a reported sighting of a man carrying a child away from the area that night. The description varied depending on who was asked and when the account was recorded. Investigators also examined whether the apartment had been specifically targeted or randomly accessed. No clear signs of struggle inside the room complicated the theory of a forced abduction. Questions emerged about how someone could enter and leave without being noticed in a busy holiday complex. Each inconsistency added pressure to a timeline that was becoming harder to stabilize. As the search expanded beyond the resort, investigators began examining the wider area surrounding Praia da Luz. Roadblocks were set up, and vehicles moving in and out of the region were checked for any sign of a child matching Madeleine's description. Attention shifted to whether the abduction had been planned rather than opportunistic. The open window raised questions, but forensic analysis could not confirm it as the entry or exit point. Inside the apartment, the lack of disturbance continued to challenge the theory of a struggle. Specialist teams were brought in, including sniffer dogs trained to detect human scent and cadaver traces. Their indications inside the apartment introduced a new and controversial direction in the investigation. However, those findings were not supported by conclusive physical evidence. From that point, the case began to split between competing interpretations of what had actually happened inside that room. As the investigation intensified, attention turned toward reconstructing every movement within the resort that night. Phone records, restaurant receipts, and witness timelines were analyzed to establish a clearer sequence of events. Investigators mapped the exact routes between the restaurant and apartment 5A. Small differences in timing began to shift how the disappearance could have unfolded. The focus returned to the reported sighting of a man carrying a child away from the area. This sighting became a central reference point, but its reliability remained uncertain. Police also examined whether someone had been observing the apartment in the days leading up to the incident. The possibility of prior surveillance suggested a level of planning that changed the nature of the case. At the same time, alternative theories continued to emerge, each relying on incomplete or conflicting details. The timeline was no longer a fixed sequence, but a set of competing interpretations. As pressure increased, the case shifted toward competing theories that attempted to explain the missing minutes. One theory focused on an external abduction, supported by the reported sighting of a man carrying a child. Another possibility questioned whether the disappearance could be connected to events inside the apartment itself. The indications from sniffer dogs continued to influence that line of thinking, despite the lack of direct evidence. Investigators also examined whether key details had been unintentionally misreported in the early hours. Small inaccuracies in memory began to carry significant weight in how the case was interpreted. At the same time, international attention brought new leads, many of which could not be verified. Each theory offered a possible explanation, but none could fully account for every detail. The investigation remained suspended between possibilities that could not be conclusively proven. As years passed, the investigation expanded across countries, but the central question remained unchanged. New suspects were identified at different stages, yet none could be definitively linked to Madeleine's disappearance. International cooperation brought fresh leads, but each one ended without a confirmed outcome. The original timeline continued to limit how far the case could move forward. Key moments from that night remained uncertain, and those gaps could not be reconstructed with precision. Public attention never fully faded, keeping pressure on investigators to revisit old evidence. Advances in forensic methods reopened certain lines of inquiry, but no final conclusion was reached. Every theory still depended on details that could not be proven beyond doubt. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann remains unresolved, defined by a night where crucial minutes were lost.